Chapter 2, 1990. I'm so sorry, Tina. Stephen Lewis could not express his sincerity in a more succinct way. I've known him since we were 8 years old and he's never taken his clothes off on stage before. Tina Garner had made a rare decision to leave London and head for Portsmouth on a cold, rainy Tuesday night in November to support the band's breakthrough gig. It had been worse than awful. Johnny, the band's 18-year-old drummer, was off his head on something far too strong for him, and although the other three kids battled on, the terrible sound that struggled out the decrepit house PA would have created insurmountable issues for even the most experienced band, let alone a group of 4 mates not long out of the sixth form. From the opening notes, it was clear that one of them was out of tune. The awfulness was compounded by the lead singer not being able to decide which of the keys to go with, and, in a feeble attempt to bridge them with harmony, he found one somewhere off the register that made the whole thing sound even worse. It was cringeworthy, and as they struggled through their opening numbers, half of the small audience were already calling it a night, prompting Johnny to shed his clothes in an act of desperation that he dedicated to the gods of rock. It was the camel-breaking straw. The house lights went up and the PA shut down, ending the horrific event before the end of the first set. Stephen, you can call me Steve. Tina sighed, once again appraising this bloke who, despite being no more than a kid, had managed to get her down the A3 through his sheer force of personality. An agent of her standing did not usually spend her time encouraging raw acts like these lads, and she never went to venues this far out of town, but there was something impressive in the way Steve had come across when he hand-delivered their EP to her office a month before. She'd taken a gamble on this band, but standing in the near-empty venue with a long drive home ahead, she knew the gamble had backfired. They were finished. Steve was heartbroken. He knew what was coming. Ever since he and the singer Ben had stolen a bottle of Orange Boom from his dad's cellar before recording the worst version of Stand By Me ever put onto a D90 tape, Steve had been on a journey to what tonight stood for. He accepted he was not going to be the musical face of any band himself, so he had thrown himself into the promotional and management side of the enterprise. Tonight was meant to be the successful culmination of those years. It should have been so different from the death knell it turned out to be. He was embarrassed. His humiliation irrevocably increased as the band began a full-on fight on the stage behind them. He'd had enough. Just fucking stop it! It was bad enough standing in front of Tina, apologising for their collective failure, without his 4 bandmates marking the permanent demise of their band with this shit. I knew I should have gone to uni. After a short lifetime dreaming about what tonight should have been, his initial association with the music business saw him flat broke and the manager of a band that was trying to kick the shit out of each other. Tina, embarrassed for him, had begun to drift towards the exit, trying to make as quick a getaway as possible. She didn't want to add to his problems by telling him what he already knew. Like her, he had gambled on the wrong horse. For her, this wasn't about the band. She had joined the company as a receptionist 10 years before. In a tough business, she clawed her way through the positions until she landed the role she'd set her sights on. She headed one of the best A&R departments in the industry. Although times were changing, Tina was one of the few women to have carved a name for herself on that side of the business. She surrounded herself with hard-working, interesting people untainted by the self-aggrandized nonsense that many of her industry peers were consumed by. The trip to Portsmouth was about more than the band on stage and was as much to satisfy her curiosity about this bloke who had earned her attention with his charming persistence. Steve had a charisma held by the front man, not the chap who booked the gigs and put out the posters. She'd lost interest before the first song was murdered. Harsh as that was, the industry was too cutthroat when it came to music, so her attention was now concerned with Steve. Changes had to be made to her staff. She'd fired one of the juniors in the office for being shit and lazy, and she had a vacancy to fill, and she was coming away from tonight with something to show for it. He really did know his music. Therefore, he knew, even before the first chords of the night, that they were screwed. The omens of a doom were cast when he saw it was Deaf Barry doing the sound. He had the look of a beaten man and smiled at Tina with weary resignation. His earliest memories were set to a permanent soundtrack of hits pulled together from the Radio 1 playlists he would listen to from under the covers late each night. Annie Nightingale, Tommy Vance, or the Kingmaker, John Peel, broadcast from the pulpit of his church, sending the choice of sounds to a divided nation languishing on its knees. He lamented that he'd been born just too late to catch Led Zeppelin playing Kimbell's, a small nightclub in Southsea in 1969, or to get an extras role in Tommy when The Who filmed on South Parade Pier 6 years later. The classic live album of the 70s were the gigs he'd never got a chance to attend, and he wished for a time machine to transport him back to them. But the world only moved forward. Back to the Future isn't real, and rather than lament not being part of the past, what he focused on was helping shape what the masses listened to in the future. Steve, you know, I have to say thanks but no thanks when it comes to the band, and you understand why, don't you? Look, Tina, thanks for coming. I know you came a long way to see those wankers, and I really appreciate it. If I ever have a chance to return the favour, please let me know. The lads on stage were still arguing, and Steve's dreaming was over. The fighting had stopped only because there was nothing left to throw, but the group was finished. They were now left to aggressively berate each other with what insults had yet to be thrown while they inspected their superficial war wounds. Steve had no more words. He was done. Surprisingly, however, Tina had still not left the building. If you're as serious as I think you are about this industry and really want to make a start on that repayment, then how about coming and working for me? Do a good job, and we would call it a favour returned. I might even pay you. Steve wondered if Tina was talking to somebody else. He pointed his middle finger at the centre of his chest, mouthing the word me in disbelief at his sudden upturn in fortunes. It is you. Oh, yeah. Tina mimed back at him. He cracked a smile for the first time all night. He could leave the chaos that had erupted behind him. Behind him. Death Barry was pulling cables across the stage with enough force to cause damage. Steve instinctively moved to help him, but Tina put her hand on his arm. This isn't your job anymore, Steve. I'll see you next week.